we're going to start this one with a little something special. I still have my 2011 Mustang GT, and it's in completely stock form. So, let's find out what happens when I pull it up next to today's subject. Have I mentioned that completely unrelated to this, my car's for sale? While the numbers and the speed are obviously impressive, what I find most interesting is how easily they're achieved. This is a 2014 Mustang GT with VMP's Eaton-style Supercharger, a catless full exhaust, and a tune. And we're making around 600 wheel horsepower. Recently reviewed my own 2011 stock Gen 1 Coyote car. So if you want my general thoughts on the S197 Mustangs and the S197 Coyotes in particular, then that's going to be the video for you, and I'll link that above. For this video, I want to talk about what the Supercharger adds to the equation. Let me start here. For what this car cost the current owner, I can't think of a whole lot of better values when it comes to just outright roller coaster hilarity. Ah! Well, that doesn't get old. It's ridiculous in the best kind of ways, and it's enough of a power difference that when I go back to my stock car, it almost feels like something's broken. You could so easily become spoiled by a car with this much straight line performance. As a street car, it's just ridiculous because the straightaways that you enjoy in other cars become little 3-second blasts that disappear so quickly. Now, being in New England, there's not a whole lot of roads where you can really wring this thing out and use everything that it has to offer. This car in particular was originally from Texas, and that strikes me as the right place for a Mustang with this kind of power. This is definitely a Texas car. Now, that isn't to say that you can't use a car like this in New England or places with kind of smaller roads. It just means you've got to be careful, you got to respect it, and you've got to pick your moments where you're going to do those quick little blasts, because they're few and far between on some of these roads. When it comes to outright acceleration and startling your passengers, this is basically a bargain Hellcat. It gives you a lot of the experience of owning one of those cars, but the barrier to ownership is so much lower. And even though this car is making over 200 horsepower more at the tires than my stock Gen 1 Coyote, there's no sacrifice in drivability. It drives like my car when you're just putzing around, and as long as you're getting clean fuel and you've got a good tune, it can take this reliably every single day. Now, I've got to say, although the engine can obviously take the power, the rest of the platform is struggling to cope. Now, besides the blower and the exhaust, this car is otherwise stock, and it's not a track package car, so it shares the brakes, suspension, the whole driveline and everything with my stock base 2011 GT. Now, let's start with the suspension. It is way too soft to tame this kind of power. Now, with the stock suspension, when you're starting to drive the car kind of hard on a winding road, even a really open one, the thing you're noticing is that you're transitioning from squat to brake dive, and then you're turning in, and so the suspension is just all over the place when you're driving the car like that. It really lacks body control when you have this much power going through it, and that's easily solved with an aftermarket suspension. Combining a 275 or 285 square tire setup like this car has, and spending about $2,000 on Maximum Motorsports for some serious suspension upgrades, you would end up with a car that is capable in every single way. It would be ridiculous. In fact, a car like this with some of those upgrades, bigger brakes, different suspension, and this kind of power level, I mean, you could keep up with or leave for dead some very, very expensive sports cars. Put plainly, an S197 Mustang in stock form with this kind of power, it's a one-trick pony, but it's a hell of a trick. These 13-14 Mustangs, the end of the S197 generation, I think that they might be my favorite looking Mustangs ever, just because they perfectly blend the classic and the modern. To me, after this, they started looking more like sports cars than muscle cars, like old school classic, and to me, this is where that perfect balance was met. There's one problem though, and that's the Shelby GT500. Buying a car that's already supercharged and getting it for a steal like the owner of this car did is one thing. But if you're adding $8,000 on top of the price of your GT for the blower, the tune, everything you need to get the drivetrain settled, and then you add another $3,000 or $4,000 on top of that for the brakes and the suspension, you're very quickly getting up towards $30,000, $35,000, and that puts you right in spitting distance of a Shelby GT500. The issue is that the Shelby already has everything that a supercharged GT like this is going to want. Larger brakes, different suspension, a different differential, and here's the really big one, the Tremec T56 to replace the MT82, which is extremely fragile and is easily damaged at these kind of power levels if you start driving the car hard. So these are things you need to consider before going down that path, because the Shelby might just be the option for you. For the price, this is an unbelievable amount of value and fun. When it hooks, it's as fast as anyone could reasonably want, it's reliable, and it's as drivable every day as the car was when it was stock. Now, of course, they have their limitations and shortcomings, but the overall package is extremely easy to fall in love with. Midsize sedan is the mainstay of most high-end luxury brands.